in this video, I'm going to talk about a few things that I did while creating this render that you see here. So for the most part, this video is going to talk a lot about lighting. There's a lot of things that I did in my lighting process here to get this look for the final render. And I'm also going to talk about a few other things as well, like asset placement, just like the general kind of like scene setup and why I placed things the way I did, and just kind of how I got this look for the final render. So for the most part, outside of the building model, all of the assets are from my new add-on called Arborea. So Arborea is a environment add-on, comes with over 600 assets, animation presets, material control. You can switch season, color, material adjustments, geometry nodes, tools, and generators, and also a powerful scatter system as well. So you can get this on SuperHive. It'll be linked down below. And this is the add-on that I use for essentially every single project. All of the assets, all of the scattering, all of the geometry nodes, tools, everything has been done with Arborea. So yeah, that will be linked down below. So before I get started with the lighting, there's one thing that I want to do. So something that I do when I just want the performance to go a little bit faster, or if I'm detailing a certain section, I use the Viewport cube mask for my scatter systems. And also I have a group right here, so I can actually just enable this group wide for everything at once. And what this is going to do is, well, let me move this a little bit closer to the foreground, like right here or something. Now the scatter system's only distributing within this cube mask. And this is only for the viewport. So if I click render, it's going to actually render out just like it did before without the cube mask. This is just for working, so you can have quicker performance while you're working in a certain section and not have any slowdowns, but still see kind of this general area. So I'm going to do a little bit smaller, something like this, just so we have kind of like a good preview right here. Most of it looks pretty good up close and we don't have as many slowdowns. And yeah, so let's talk about the lighting now. So there's a lot of different things that I do when lighting my scenes. As you can see, the entire environment is just kind of surrounded by these trees that are just kind of spammed around like this. Obviously not realistic. Trees don't float upside down over forests, but this is really nice for just kind of getting controlled shadows. This is my process for just creating all of these shadows throughout the scenes and like getting these kind of natural highlights. So if I come over here and I just turn off the light blockers, the scene's going to be extremely bright. So it's just super bright, really flat. There's not really many shadows. It's just really flat. And the light blockers are just super nice for just creating the depth, the realism, and just like that natural look. So I'm going to cover that and then also the lighting as well. So if I just turn off the lighting, you're going to see just the scene with only the HDRI. So the HDRI that I'm using is just this kind of, there's not really that much direct lighting. It's mostly just for the ambient lighting. So you get a little bit of this kind of like cool highlight on the left side, but it's nothing too strong. Most of my lighting is just coming from this sunlight right here and the sky in the background. So let's start with the HDRI because we already have this right here. This is just a really basic setup. So I'm going to go into the world settings, and the HDRI setup is just basically a polyhaven.com HDRI. I'm sure a lot of you guys know Polyhaven. It's a free resource for tons of HDRIs, textures, models, all CCO, really good quality too. And actually I have their add-on as well, which allows you to have all of their content, including their HDRI library, directly in your asset library. So you can just drag and drop it into your scene and it will just quickly swap out whatever lighting you have for the new one. And it's super handy. It gives you this node group. You can rotate, adjust the strength, the warmth, and just whatever controls you need for this. Yeah, so that's just basically my setup. I have the lighting coming from the left side, as you can see, and that's just like right over there. But as I mentioned before, this is mostly for the ambient lighting. There's a little bit of the highlight on the left, but nothing too crazy. So yeah, that's this. Let me pull this down, and then let's just go to the background now. Okay, so this gives a little bit of a warm look. So I have these two skies right here, and it's going to bring some of that kind of like orange glow to the scene. And let me select this back here so we can bring this up into the shader editor so I can show you guys what this looks like. So this is another pretty basic setup. This is a Visuals of Julius sky texture or sky image. So let me open this up real fast. So this is the sky image. Visuals of Julius, he is a photographer, and he has the sky pack that I use sometimes for my scenes, and they're really good quality. They're not overly saturated or edited or anything, which makes it really easy to use for your 3D scenes because you can adjust the contrast, the color, and things don't blow out like super easily. In this case, I did make it a little bit oversaturated and over contrasted just because mixed with the volume, it kind of fades out a little bit like this. So I just kind of did that to make up for that kind of faded look. In here, I just have the sky texture going into the color of emission. The strength is at 3, so it's really bright, just kind of giving you this kind of orange glow color. And then I'm using RGB curves and then a hue and saturation. So if I mute these real fast, this is what it looks like without the editing. It's just a little bit more, faded, desaturated. The RGB curves, this just brings up the contrast a bit, just a little bit. I pull down the blacks and then pull up the highlights and makes it just a little bit less faded. And then saturation, as I mentioned, I made it really saturated because the volumetrics fade this out a bit, and I wanted that kind of like really orange glow in my scene. So yeah, I use this a lot for my skies, makes it really easy to edit. And the strength is at 3. Without that, it's a lot more dark, doesn't really look nearly as good. So yeah, a high strength for this, and I felt like that looked really nice. And also, before I move on to the volume, I should probably mention this, how it's tracking to my camera. So this is something I do for all my skies. It makes positioning the sky where you need it, or like adjusting the position, really quick and easy. So if you go in here to the constraints on the sky, you can go add constraint, track to, then you'll get this right here. And you can just do your camera, so whatever camera you're using, as the target. And then no matter what, the sky is always going to track towards the camera. So basically all I do is I just bring in the sky image and then I move it off to the distance like this, wherever I need it to. Then I can go into camera view and just click G and kind of just move this around where I need it to. And the rotation is always facing towards the camera. Another tip too, default is -Z, but say the lighting is coming from the wrong side and you need to flip the image, you can just go to +Z and it will flip the image just like that. And let's go into volume now. So the volumetrics just kind of smoothing out the lighting a bit. As you can see, it just kind of blends everything together and makes it look a bit more natural than it did before. Before I had the volume on, everything was a lot more kind of like harsh. The darks were kind of a bit darker. Things just didn't blend together that well. So I use volume for every single scene I make. It is pretty much essential for your lighting to get a realistic, natural environment with depth. And it's really easy to do. Basically, my process is let me do this real fast. So textured. So I just surround my entire scene with a cube, as you can see here. I just set it to display as bounds so that I can, zoom around and not have this box kind of interfering with my view. And then for the material, very basic, it's just a volume scatter node going into volume, a color of pure white. Default, it starts slightly like off-white. I just bring that up to pure white. And then whatever density looks good. In this case, it's 0.0015. I don't want the volume to be super visible. I want it to be sort of the kind of like something that you notice when it's gone, but you don't notice when it's there necessarily, if that makes sense. Unless you're trying to go for like a super foggy scene. But for something like this scene, I want the volume to just kind of like help push the render and make it kind of blend together well, but not anything that you actually notice or see unless it's gone. All right, and then the anisotropy. So let me actually turn on the sun and the light blockers real fast. Anisotropy is really good for like kind of golden hour scenes or scenes like this, essentially where you have like a strong sunlight and you want to be able to see either sun rays or just some sort of kind of like bloom around where the light's coming from. If I set this to 0, the default value, you can see the fog kind of like equals out and it's kind of spread more evenly, which can look good in certain scenes, but in these types of scenes, I like to have kind of it more distributed where the light's coming from, and that just looks really nice in my opinion. So 0.75, this isn't always 0.75, but a higher range close to that, like 0.6 to 0.85 is generally what I like to do for these types of scenes. Okay, turn that off and let's just move back into the sun now. So the sun is actually tracking similarly to how I was tracking the sky, but instead of tracking to the camera, I track to an empty. So let me go over here real fast. I have an empty inside of my focal point. The reason I also didn't track the sun directly to this building is just because I want the extra flexibility. If I was tracking the sun to the building and then I move the building a little bit, that's going to change the lighting. Just placing an empty in there allows me to keep the sun where I want it to and allow me to like move the model freely without adjusting the lighting. But yeah, this is a super nice workflow. It uses the constraints just like before. It's just tracking to the empty instead. So now if I, move the empty around, it changes the lighting, which the lighting doesn't look great right now because of the light blockers, but as you can see, when I move the sun around, it always faces the scene. So when I'm getting the light direction that I need, basically all I do is like track to my focal point or where I want the sun to face. I move the sun up and then away from the scene. And then I'll generally just go into like top-down view like this, and I can just move the sun around the scene and figure out the lighting really easily. And you have all the controls you need this way. You can move around for direction. If you go closer to the scene, like this, then you have more top-down lighting, like midday basically. And then if I go back like this, then we got lower sun lighting. So yeah, really easy to work with. Sometimes I'll find something I like, duplicate it, turn off that version, and then try something, new, and, just kind of do that until I find the lighting that works. This setup is pretty easy. So I have 15 on the strength, which is really bright, as you can see. I don't always go this bright. Usually it's like between 5 and 7, but I also usually overlay it with like an HDRI that actually has direct lighting and isn't, this kind of HDRI with just ambient lighting. And I'm also using light blockers very heavily in this scene. Also for the color, I'm not using this color wheel for color. I'm actually using a black body so I can get the realistic color temperature. So the way you can do this is basically, well, if I just bring in a normal light. So in here, all you got to do is click use nodes, click this color, and then over here, you're going to see black body. And then this is going to give you a black body. So you can actually adjust the color directly in here, or if you go into the shader editor, we're using nodes, so you can actually just adjust it in here as well. So let me select the sun and just show you these settings. So generally for my sunset scenes like this, between like 3,000, I guess my average is like 3,500 to 5,000 or so. In this scene, I did 4,000K, which looked really good. But if I do like 2,000 or something, oh, I guess that's 200. Yeah, so you can get realistic color temperature really easy this way. But yeah, 4,000 right here, nothing on the strength. I just do my strength right here like normal. And yeah, that's my sunlight, so super basic. So yeah, super basic, really easy to do. And let's move into the light blockers now. So this is where the lighting gets just really nice. If I turn this on, you can just, see the scene just completely changes. Like it looked really flat and not that great before. With the light blockers, things actually have depth, there's shadows, contrast, and just looks way more natural. So there's multiple different steps that I do with my light blockers, especially in this scene. So you can see I have all these planes right here, which if I zoom back out here, these are just blocking a ton of the ambient light from the right side. I have these trees behind the scene as well, just kind of blocking some of the light down here and making the forest feel a little bit more full. And then I also have all these floating trees surrounding the scene, which is doing most of the work. And then I have this cube, the light absorption cube, which I actually face here. Let me put this as textured. I place this behind the camera and I delete the front face. So the camera is just kind of surrounded by this cube. So those are all of my light blocker steps, and I'll just kind of take you through those just step by step. So let's just go over here. I'm going to select all of these. Let me hide them. So I think the first thing I should talk about are the planes. So let's just turn these on. Okay, so for these planes, with them and then without them, you can see on the right side, it just kind of like darkens the shadows a bit, makes it a little bit less flat. And the reason for this is because, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of ambient light coming from this HDRI. So these just being directly on the right side and just also massive in general, it's just blocking all of that ambient light coming from the right side, but still allowing it to come from the left side, above it, backside, and etc. So basically what I did was I just created these planes, started moving them up, kind of until I got the contrast that I liked. I duplicated them, scaled them around, and kind of moved them until I had the exact look that I wanted. But as you can see, it does make a change when I move these individually, but the change is very subtle. And then also you'll notice I have these holes on them too. So the reason for this was just so I have a little bit of light passing through it. I did feel like it was a little bit too dark. It was a very subtle change, but it was something that I felt like it needed just slightly. And this is just using a noise texture and then a color ramp to crunch that noise pattern in a little bit more. And that's just going into alpha. So if I turn off the color ramp, you can see There's the noise pattern, but it's mostly transparent. This is just making the opaque values a little bit more just, harsh so that it's less transparent in most places. And I'm also using a black value so that it's absorbing most of the light as well. So if I actually make this pure white, it might make the scene pretty bright. Yeah. So the lighter values reflect more light than darker values. So that's why I'm using the dark values. If I have a light value, all of the sunlight that's shining over here is hitting this wall and then bouncing back into the scene and, making the right side of this image way more bright. And that just does not look good. Having a black value for this giant plane, the light from the sun is hitting these planes and then just basically just hitting the wall and stopping, therefore just making this much darker right here and just absorbing all of that light. Second thing is pretty similar, but for behind the camera. So I mentioned the cube that surrounds my foreground. So if I come over here now, turn this on, same thing as well. It's just a black cube. So any of the light that's shining into here just hits the wall and basically stops. And kind of subtle right now because there's not too much like light blockage in the scene. So it's still very bright, but without this, and then with this, it just kind of helps kind of push the dark values closer to the camera. We got some of the silhouette. The backsides of all these assets are a little bit more contrasted, shadowed, and just not as flat with all of this kind of like even lighting when we don't have this light absorption cube. So my method when I'm placing these is basically I just, I scale up the cube until it starts blocking the amount of like area that I like. I usually don't want to see this hard cut. As you can see, like right here, there's this hard cut from the cube. I don't want to usually see that. It sometimes works. If I do have it visible like this, I'll try to kind of blend it with these trees just to kind of like create more natural kind of shadows around the edges of the cube, just so it doesn't have this like straight line between, light and then shadow. You can kind of break it up with these patches. But in this case, and in most cases, I try to just make it so it darkens these kind of like corner assets and assets like right next to the camera without actually seeing the wall of, shadow. And yeah, this color kind of just depends on how dark I need this. Right now it's kind of subtle, but you can see kind of pitch black on the corners. But if I bring this up, it slightly lightens a little bit just because, light's going into the cube and then bouncing right back on the back sides of those assets. Okay. And then the giant white oaks behind the scene. So these, let me turn those on. Kind of a subtle thing. So you can see right here, it just kind of filled up that background a little bit more. Before it was a little bit empty. So without it, and then with it, it just kind of makes it look like the forest extends farther out into the scene. And the reason I did this was just because I kind of wanted to save memory. I didn't want to just like have to scatter way farther out and take up a lot more memory. I could just use, like a handful of trees scaled up quite large to block all that light and make it look like this forest is scattering farther than it actually is, just to save memory. And these trees are giant, but that doesn't really matter because if you zoom in, all you're seeing is the tree tops. And all of this forest is basically just treetops of green anyway. So it's not like you actually can tell that they're giant floating trees, and it just blends in naturally anyway. So yeah, there's that. And then all of the floating trees here. So let me actually just enable all of these. This is the most time consuming part of lighting for me. It can be a little bit tedious, but I really like doing this. And yeah, this is the most drastic change in my lighting process, as you can see. The reason for this is you just have just full control over where your shadows are, what light you're blocking, and just basically where you draw your eyes too. So if you've never done this before and you're just starting off, it can be really tricky to figure out like where in 3D space to place a tree to get these shadows directly in the exact areas that you need. It's just kind of something that you get better at with muscle memory. Like when I start doing this now, it's a lot easier to kind of figure out where to place stuff. I generally don't know exactly where to put things still, but it just gets a little bit easier to figure out where when you're just doing this more quickly. So let me actually turn these back off real fast. And then I'll just show you I'll do this with like a few trees just to kind of show you my workflow for this. So I like to use trees like this, essentially, where if I zoom into this tree, It's a very light tree. So by that I mean there's patches of dense leaves, but they're not too dense, and then there's lots of open areas as well. So it's not like a hard wall of just blocked light. Like you're not using like a cliff or like a giant cube or something that's just blocking 100% of the light. Light is still passing through these objects. It's just kind of more subtle, and it makes it more smooth and natural. And especially since we're making a forest as well, you do want those kind of like random patterns in just like the shadows that look like trees, because obviously they are trees. So this just kind of overall is the best thing, at least in my opinion, for blocking light in forests. And also another reason I like doing this is, as you can see, this whole area is surrounded by trees, and all of the light coming from the other areas is of course getting blocked by these. But then since we just have this big open area of just nothing, we have this just giant wall of light, which just does not feel that realistic, because you'd expect there to be tons of trees off to the left as well. So we're just kind of faking that. But yeah, when I'm starting to do this, I will bring in a tree. I'll usually start off really big because obviously a bigger asset is going to block more light, and it'll make it a lot easier to kind of see where the light is getting blocked. And then you can kind of start moving it around until it starts hitting the area you like. But yeah, my light source is coming from here, so I'm just going to kind of place this somewhere in front of the light source. And you can see I'm hitting this whole area right here. So once I start hitting an area that I want to start blocking light, let's say like something like this, I'll place it here, I'll kind of zoom in, and then I can kind of figure out if I want to like block more, block less. Let's see. I probably want to block a little bit of light kind of like in this area. So you also want to figure out exactly like where you want the viewer to look as well. So like the kind of like the more focal areas of your main object. So in this case, I kind of want people to look at this tower top right here, and then maybe also around this area too. So I'm going to place shadows kind of surrounding those sections. So like these patches will be open with highlights, and then shadows kind of subtly surrounding those. So when I'm moving this around, I'm trying to kind of keep that in mind. And as you can see, the shadows aren't super dark. Like it's creating a difference, but it's not over the top. It looks way more natural because these leaves, well, the leaves have transparency as well. Like you can kind of like light passes through the leaves themselves. And then there's also these patches without leaves. So I feel like this highlight's slightly too big. So I'm going to scale down the tree slightly. And I do kind of want to be a little bit darker around this area too. So maybe I'll Alt D to duplicate this. And then the shadow gets a bit darker, but I might scale this down a bit and then kind of move this over. So you can also see when I move this to the right, it's also moving to the right on the image as well. So you just really want to look at the camera while you're moving this around and just kind of keep an eye on that. And the more you do this, the easier it becomes to kind of just naturally know at least the general area that you need to put things for it to look good. Let's also move this a little bit more to the left. Something like that. Cool. So we have that a little bit more dark. Let's try something down here now. So Alt D. And yeah, so I just moved this to the bottom of the cabin. Lighting is pretty even right now, so let's actually make this a bit smaller so that patch isn't so large. Then we can move this back up. Okay, so we got a shadow right there. Let's go a little bit lower. So I'm scaling this down, moving it back up. There we go. And that's looking pretty good, but this still kind of has this big wall of light. I need some sort of kind of shadow to break up that flat wall of light, and just to make it look a bit more natural and less blown out. I'll have to move this over to the right a little bit more. And you can see when I move this to the right, the shadow updates as well. And now I can just kind of figure out where on this wall I want to have highlights and where I want the shadows. Do I want it in between, or do I want it on the right side? I think on the right side looks kind of good. Nice. Okay. So yeah, obviously I spent way more time to get the highlights and shadows on the cabin and also just throughout the scene in general. But I'm not going to go through that whole process. I'm just kind of showing you kind of my workflow for a few of these trees. If I'm doing like the foreground or middle ground area, same thing. I just make sure I put it in that general area in front of the light source. And right now, this made this whole area a little bit darker. So let's just work on this real fast. Let's kind of try to darken the foreground a little bit more. So something like this. That looks pretty good, actually. I like that. Okay, actually, that's pretty good too. This is kind of like creating somewhat of a silhouette type look. But yeah, this is essentially what I do, and I just kind of keep doing it until the lighting looks how I want it to. Nothing's blown out anymore, but you know, the focal point's still the brightest object. Let me come back over here and here, turn these off. Yeah, so even with those, you can see it still made a giant difference in comparison to what it looks like now without those. But let me turn these on now. You can see as I gradually turn these on, the scene just gets way more like realistic, has way more depth, and it just looks way more natural, especially right now. All right, so a few things on like why I placed certain trees where I did, and like why I have lighting on certain areas and why I have shadows on certain areas. So as I mentioned, I want the focal point to be the brightest area because I want your eyes to be drawn towards this focal point. So essentially what I'm looking for is creating those subtle shadows in this area while still leaving super bright highlights in the areas I want on the focal point. And then as you can see, this whole area like surrounding like the corners and then the edges of the image, they're all much more dark. So basically I'm trying to create shadows like in these sections, especially down here in the foreground, and then kind of leaving this whole area still open as well with light, just so we have this kind of like light ray and then this open patch of lighting. And then another thing I like to do with like the foreground, so I have this path leading from the camera to the focal point, which is also a really good thing for just drawing your eyes to the focal point, having just like a leading path to the focal point just to draw your eyes along this direction. But then also, as I mentioned, there's the shadows surrounding the scenes. And then I have shadows covering the path in the middle ground as well. But also I keep this area much more bright than I do these sections, just so we have this bright light source and then this trail of light leading to the foreground as well, just not as much light as this section. I also like to kind of have these gaps, as you can see. So I have like shadow and then this like small kind of patch of light, another shadow, and then like a small patch of light, some more shadows, and then light, shadow, light. So like really just breaking up the lighting with these trees just makes it look really, really nice, and is my favorite thing to do with the lighting. But yeah, that was pretty much 90% of what I wanted to talk about for this video. I just wanted to cover like the lighting, what I did here, and my general workflow for the scene. I will mention some things about like the scene building though. So I did bring up that I am using my add-on Arborea, as you can see here. It has a ton of assets, a good mix between realistic and fantasy as well, because I make a lot of fantasy art. I just love fantasy assets. This library is also expanding. So there's 600 now, but I'm constantly making assets because this tool is for my own workflow. If I need assets for a project, they're just going to be added into Arborea. So pretty consistent on updates. But yeah, there's a big source of assets. And yeah, the process for me just placing assets essentially is I can find an asset that I want. So say I want like this droopy conifer, click import, and it just imports into the scene wherever your 3D cursor is. And then say if I wanted this to be like over here beside the cabin area, let's say like right there, move this over, and now we have this right there. And then I can just kind of figure out the position, which actually I should have added this into this render. I kind of like that right there. Well, I already finished the render, oh well. But yeah, so you can just place assets like this. Essentially what my workflow was for placing these was, well, similar to what I was talking about the lighting. I'm trying to draw your eyes towards the focal point. So you can see with these trees are also framing this area. And then also the angle, it's not necessarily straight up on a lot of these. It's also kind of tilted to the left, which is kind of pushing your eyes inwards towards this area as well. And then also with the path, when I'm placing these assets around, I kind of leave the pathway relatively empty. I mean, there's like scattered assets like grass, the moss, logs and rocks and all that. But like the bigger assets like these weeds, the plants, the shrubs, I kind of leave this empty trail. And then I just surround those areas on the left and the right to leave this area open for the path up to the focal point. And most of these are hand placed too. So the only assets that are scattered are, well, let me just do this real fast. Yeah, so these are the only assets that I scattered. So the grasses and ground scatter, and then not all of the trees, but about like 50% of the trees. So my method for this essentially is I will create my scatter systems, and for like the bigger assets, especially trees, I'll make the density less than I actually want. I'll just kind of do like 70% of the density that I need. Find a seed that works, not necessarily perfect, but good enough. And then I'll just fill in the empty spots with hand-placed trees and, shrubs and whatever I need to fill that area. And the reason I like to do this is just because like messing around with seeds can take a while to get the exact one that you want. Like you can very easily get seeds that look good and perfect. It's just that I like to kind of spend more time hand placing and getting the exact placement that I need for my scene. Like I can just, rotate, scale up, duplicate, do whatever I need with the hand place assets and get the exact look much more easily and much more quickly than if I'm just messing with seeds for like multiple hours straight. So yeah, I kind of just get like the base set up with a scatter system. And then I go through and start hand placing the rest of the trees in the areas to fill in those gaps. And then here's the conifer trees. So yeah, there's that. And then all of the other hand placed assets. And with detailing, it's really just kind of like looking at the scene, trying to figure out what feels empty, what it needs. And you're just really importing assets, moving them around. If it doesn't work in a certain area, try somewhere else. If it just doesn't work, then try a different asset. One more thing too is the colors. So for this one, I was trying to go somewhat fall-like. Like if I open up the final render, I was trying to go for this very like warm, kind of orangish feeling. So I wanted to have a lot of like yellows, oranges, and reds, but I also still wanted to keep a lot of green as well mixed in. I didn't want to just be strictly red, yellow, and orange. So for this, I just basically used Arborea's material controls. So for like this one right here, I just selected my asset, go into edit materials, and then I have these autumn settings. So this slider just goes between red, orange, and yellows. So if I go over here, you can make it yellow. Farther to the left, makes it more red. And then also, depending on what color you're going for, you can mess with the brightness, make it darker, make it more bright, or mess with like the saturation, all of that. Or you can also just turn off the autumn slider, turn it back to green, and mess with, even more colors as well. But for this, the autumn kind of like yellowish orange was really good for this one. And then this one over here, oh yeah, this one was already an autumn asset. So I also have the season slider. So the default one is summer. So it looks like this, it's green. And without the color there, it just kind of, I don't know, I feel like it's just too big of a wall of green. I felt like having some sort of separation of color behind the house looked really good. So I chose the autumn variation of this. And I just think that just pushes the house forward a lot more. So just like, it kind of pushes the forest farther back and the house more up front, just because we have that kind of separation behind the house. Same thing here, I think. Okay, yeah, this one's using the autumn color. It's a lot farther to the left, so it's darker red. I lowered the brightness and the saturation quite a bit. So as you can see right here, it's like this very deep kind of dark red. And I duplicated this a few times around here. And I basically just did this for all of the colored assets. I either just switched it to an autumn season, or I manually adjusted the colors until I got what I liked. And the distribution of color, my workflow for this was kind of, I still want my focus to be on the center of the house, and having too many like very bright colors on one side of the image is going to also draw your eyes to that part of the image. So I was trying to avoid that. So like for the yellows, I have a yellow here on the right, a yellow here on the right, but also I have a yellow here on the left, and then one also over here on the left, kind of evening it out so it's not, unevenly distributed. And then same with the red, I have a deep kind of dark red on the left, as well as a similar amount on the right. And also similar with the flowers, I have kind of like this orangish, reddish, and then same thing here, and same thing here. I'm just kind of like distributing the colors somewhat evenly throughout the scene, just so I have that kind of color variation, but it's not drawing your eyes away from where I want you to look super obviously. But yeah, and then also these vines right here. So these are my favorite things to work with. These are, here, let me go out here. It's just like this giant procedural vine. So you can actually just draw these really easily. So if I go into the tools and generators, I can just do draw a vine, and you can just draw this vine and you can create it right here. It's on a Bezier curve. So if I just go into transform after I do this, I can actually just move this around like a normal Bezier curve. And yeah, you get all these controls for like the twist, radius, displacement, branch count, moss, all of that, etc. Super fun tool. I love using this. It's probably something that I use for every single project, at least any outdoor one. And then a lot of these vines too, I just have this vine drawing tool in here. So this vine drawing tool, you just go in here, draw vines. It just allows you to draw vines on the surface of really any object. So I have these hand placed vines and ivies just like around the building. And then I used these to kind of just draw in more subtly in the more empty areas. So you can see I can just draw. That wasn't really the best one. Let's just do something like this. And then maybe some like squiggly lines on the corner. And yeah, really quick, really easy to get these kind of like subtle, nice vines just growing around your objects. And I love using this. This is super fun to do. But yeah, that is really all I want to talk about for this video. Mostly just want to talk about the lighting and how I got, like the shadows and just this sort of look in general. So yeah, I'll talk to you guys in the next video.